Okay, welcome back. Uh, Still in October. I wanted to do a couple more videos today if I get a chance. It's been on my mind, and I think in the last video I mentioned it, that I wanted to do something on the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, because I was aware that in the Pound video, I think it's just called Pound's Speeches from Rome, Ezra Pound's Speeches from Rome, that because I hadn't studied the background material for Pound's speeches, or at least the related material, that I should do that, and I should kind of do it in detail to give you context for Pound's approach in the speeches. I wouldn't say they are, this text is like the grounding worldview that Pound's responding to. It could be, I'd leave that up to you, but it's definitely a large aspect of why he feels the way he does when he does, which is during the war. So I thought I'd get into that, and I thought I'd give myself some time to do this, because the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is a fairly short thing. It's not too long to my knowledge, but I've never read it before, and I wanted to give you the experience of me reading it for the first time. It's mentioned in so many kind of conspiratorial videos and books that I really wanted to give you a chance of just the reading of the document. So I'm going to put the link to the version of the protocols that I have. I'm going to try to be totally transparent about everything, so that you can just go online, look at the thing, look at the circumstances of its publication, and make your own mind up. So we're going to go through this today, and I'm going to actually read out. I was just having a look at some of the introductory material in the book that was published of the protocols in Britain in 1920, and I thought I'd actually go through some of their approach, their extra material in presenting these protocols, just to give you a flavour of their feeling at the time of what the protocols were. It's good to get a sense of history in that way. As far as I can tell, and we're going to look at this in detail in a minute, they were published in Britain in 1920 as a kind of a response to a Times article. This is my knowledge, that was published previous to this publication of this small book. But the actual protocols themselves were published, or published by a Russian guy in 1905 in Russia. Now, we're not really going to get into the original publication too much, but it does have ramifications for Bolshevism, for the Soviet Union essentially, and so that's my interest as well, so you'll get a little bit of a flavour of that. So I'm going to pull up the document now, and I'll just read all the pertinent aspects of it so you can get a flavour of it. Feel free to if I put the link in, you can feel free to read along with me if you want. The interesting thing with this small book is that it does have a picture of the Jew Bolshevik emblem surrounded by the symbolic serpent. I'm on page 8 of this book now, and somebody has written in Eliphas Levi in there, and I've already mentioned in another video that Levi's quite a controversial figure. It's interesting that that's just penned in there. Some people don't like him. I don't, like I said, I don't have opinions one way or the other. I don't have any proof that he's kind of behind this, but there is a view in this material that says that this document is coming out of French Freemasonry, which would kind of have a connection to Eliphas Levi. Maybe that's stuff for another video. I'll just read and comment at will to begin with, and then see how we get along. It says preface note to the third edition, so I'm assuming that this edition has had, well, it says it's had previous editions, so how far back in time I don't know, whether these were a cluster of publications around the end of the 19-teens and then into 1920. I'm not sure. We might find out. The problem with this document, at least at this first point, is that the end of the lines is cut off with the printing, so I'll just make best of it and see. Okay, the rapid exhaustion of the second edition of this work is clearly something that the British branch of the Iron family of nations is aware of at last, or becoming aware of. The terrible story published in the Times. Now, the date is cut off, but it's useful to know this. August 19th to something. I've been told in another, well, it's in another part of the text that it's 1920, and it took this document then goes on to say the torture and murder of Jews by the Tsar and his whole family is an additional confirmation of the working out of the policy of the learned elders. Now that's interesting, because there are certain things I've said in previous videos to perhaps lead you to believe that I was the pro-Tsar. I still am, to be honest, to a degree. But there's another aspect to this too, which again goes against this whole Jewish conspiracy generalistic approach to things. So that the people who are publishing this are actually saying the murder of the Jews by the Tsar is part of the protocols of the Elders of Zion, part of their policy. So they'll murder their own, these Freemasonic influences, as well as anyone else who gets in the way. That's the implication here. How you feel about the Tsar, I mean, that's a tricky one. We might have to spend more time on that on another video. This is nothing less than the extermination of Christians and the destruction of Christian nationality. Okay, I'm going to skip some of this. I just want to get a flavour of the preface. Again, like I say, this was published in England, in London in 1920, but it's referring back. It will explain itself anyway. I don't need to repeat myself too much. Preface. At a moment when the whole of Western Europe is enlarging upon the benefits of constitutional governments and discussing on the one hand the merits and on the other the sins of maximalism (brackets Bolshevism), I think that I may with advantage put before the English-speaking public the translation of a book published at Tsarskoye Selo in Russia in the year 1905. This links back to Alexander Blok as well, interestingly, because Blok wrote a poem called The 12, and he saw Bolshevism as a confirmation of some form of Christian apocalypse. Again, stuff for other videos. A copy of the original may be seen at the British Museum Library under number 3926 D17, stamped British Museum, 10th of August 1906. That's interesting, you could probably find that. How many more copies of the book may be seen in the world I can hardly say, as shortly after its appearance in 1905 most copies seem to have been bought up simultaneously and apparently with a purpose. On this point I would only warn my readers that they must not take a copy of this translation to Russia, as anybody in whose possession it is found by the Bolsheviki is immediately shot as being the bearer of reactionary propaganda. That's interesting. The book was presented to the Russian public by Professor Sergei Nilus. It contains 1. An introduction to the main text written by Sergei Nilus in 1905. 2. Notes on lectures delivered to Jewish students in Paris in the year 1901. 3. A portion of an epilogue written by the same Sergei Nilus. I have not considered it necessary to reproduce the whole of the epilogue. And for me, I'm not going to read too much into the extra material, but I do want to give you some flavour of it. As portions of it, he's talking about the epilogue, as portions of it would be of no interest to British public and do not bear upon the question before me, namely that of the Jewish peril. Again, this is a generalistic statement. I don't know how true it is. I guess one of the reasons I'm doing this video is to try to extricate what that Zionism is compared to simply a Jewish danger, and not make the mistake that Pound made, possibly. I would ask my readers to bear in mind that the lectures above referred to were delivered in 1901, and that Neelas's introduction and epilogue were written in 1905. Again, I've got some problem because part of this along the side is lost, some of the text is lost. It is impossible to read any of the parts of this volume, possibly, today without being struck by the strong prophetic something which runs through them all, not only as regards the Holy Russia, but also as regards certain sinister developments which may be observed at the present moment throughout the whole world. Gentiles beware. And that preface was written on the 2nd of December 1919. Introduction. Hold on. Yeah, so we don't have a person's name. We don't have a name for the preface and introduction. This is the introduction. I may skip around in this a little bit. Manuscript has been handed to me by a personal friend now deceased, which with extraordinary precision and clearness describes the plan and development of a sinister worldwide conspiracy having for its object that of bringing the unregenerate world to its inevitable dismemberment. This document came into my possession some 4 years ago, 1901, with the positive assurance that it is a true copy in translation. Sorry, this is Neelas. And this is an English, I'm assuming this is an English translation of his Russian introduction. That it is a true copy in translation of original documents stolen by a woman from one of the most influential and most highly initiated leaders of Freemasonry. The theft was accomplished at the close of a secret meeting of the initiated, quotation marks, in France, that nest of Jewish Masonic conspiracy, quotation marks. To those who would see and hear, I venture to reveal this manuscript under the title of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. On first scanning through these minutes, they might convey the impression of being what we usually call truisms, and appear to be more or less ordinary truths, though expressed with a pungency and a hatred which does not usually accompany ordinary truths. There seethes between the lines that arrogant and deep-rooted racial and religious hatred which has been so long successfully concealed. And it bubbles over and flows, as it were, from an overfilled vessel of rage and revenge, fully conscious that its triumphant end is near. We cannot omit to remark that its title does not altogether correspond to its contents. These are not exactly minutes of meetings, but a report made by some powerful person, divided into sections not always in a logical sequence. They convey the impression of being the part of something threatening and more important, the beginning of which is missing. The aforementioned origin of this document speaks for itself. By the prophecies of the Holy Fathers, Antichrist's doings must always be a parody on Christ's life, and must have likewise their Judas. But of course, from an earthly point of view, its Judas will not achieve his ends. Thus, although of brief duration, a complete victory of the world ruler is assured. I'll read that again. From an earthly point of view, its Judas will not achieve his ends. Thus, although a brief duration, a complete victory of the world ruler is assured. So Neelis is saying that there will be some success to this plan, but ultimately it will be defeated. I'm guessing that's the reading one should make. This reference to W. Solovyev's words is not intended to be used as a proof of their scientific authority. From an eschatological point of view, science is out of place. The important part is fate. Solovyev gives us the canvas. The embroidery will be worked by the proposed manuscript. Now, I could be confusing Solovyev with the Russian mystic, and I'm not sure if this is the same person. That might be worth your research. We might be justly reproached with the apocryphal nature of this document, but were it possible to prove this worldwide conspiracy by means of letters or by declarations of witnesses, and of its leaders could be unmasked, holding its sanguinary threads, the mysteries of iniquity would by this very fact be violated. To prove itself, it has to remain unmolested till the day of its incarnation in the son of perdition, in quotes. Hold on. In the present complications of criminal proceedings, we cannot look for direct proofs, but we have to be satisfied with circumstantial evidence, and with such the mind of every indignant Christian observer is filled. That which is written in this work ought to suffice for those who have ears to hear as being obvious, and is offered to them with the intention of urging them to protect themselves while there is yet time, and to be on their guard. Our conscience will be satisfied if by the grace of God we attain this most important aim of warning the Gentile world without exciting in its heart wrath against the blinded people of Israel. We trust that the Gentiles will not entertain feelings of hatred against the erroneously believing mass of Israel in its innocence of the satanic intention of its leaders. And again, I'm missing text. The scribes and Pharisees who have already once proved themselves to be the destruction of Israel. Turning aside the wrath of God, there remains but one way, union of all Christians in our Lord Jesus Christ, and total extermination, repentance for ourselves and for others. But is this possible in the present unregenerate condition of the world? It is impossible for the world, but still possible for believing Russia. The present political conditions of Western European states and of their affiliated countries in other continents were prophesied by the Prince of Apostles. Mankind, in its aspiration to perfect its terrestrial life, and in its search for a better realization of the idea of power, which could secure everybody's well-being, and in its quest of a reign of universal satiety, which has become the highest ideal of human life, has changed the direction of its ideals by pronouncing the Christian faith as entirely discredited, and not having justified the hopes bestowed on it, overthrowing former idols, creating new thrones possibly, and raising new gods onto pedestals. The world erects for them temples, one more luxurious and more magnificent than the other, and again deposes and destroys them. Mankind has lost the very conception of the power granted by God to kings anointed, and is approaching the conditions of anarchy. Soon the swivel of the republican and constitutional scales will be worn through. The scales will collapse, and in their fall will carry away all the governments to the very abyss of raging anarchy. Well, that seems true of our modern governments anyway. Notice that this is kind of coming out of a staunch Russian Christian view of life in general. The world's last rampart and last refuge from the coming storm is Russia. Her truth faith is still alive, and the anointed empress still stands as her sure protector. I'm assuming that he's referring to the Tsar. I can't remember when the Tsar was assassinated. Check that out. I can possibly put something in the description about that. All the efforts of destruction on the part of the sinister and evident servants of the Antichrist, his conscious and unconscious workers, are concentrated on Russia. The reasons are understood, the objects are known, they must be known to believing and faithful Russia. The more threatening the coming historical moment is, the more frightening the approaching events concealed in the dense clouds are. The more courageously and with greater determination the brave and intrepid hearts of the Russians must beat. Bravely ought they to join hands round the sacred banner of their church and round the throne of their emperor. So long as the soul lives, so long also the flaming heart beats in the bosom. There is no room for the deathly spectre of despair, but it is for us and for our fidelity to gain the Almighty's mercy and to delay the hour of Russia's fall. That was written in 1905. Now I'm assuming this is the main text of the protocols. Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Interestingly, I think the title was Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, but one way or the other. I'm not sure if this functions as the actual document or not. Let's read it and see. We will be plain spoken and discuss the significance of each reflection, and by comparisons and deductions we will produce full explanations. By this means I will expose the conception of our policy, I think this is the main document, and that of the Goys, i.e. Jewish definition of all Gentiles, brackets. It must be noted that people with corrupt instincts are more numerous than those of noble instinct. Therefore, in governing the world, the best results are obtained by means of violence and intimidation, and not by academic discussions. Every man aims at power. Everyone would like to become a dictator if he only could do so, and rare indeed are the men who would not be disposed to sacrifice the welfare of others in order to attain their own personal aims. So this is quite malevolent, essentially, because the worldview is that everybody would stamp on the lesser beings if they only had the chance. It's not the Huxley approach, as I mentioned in my other videos. What restrained the wild beasts of prey which we call men? What has ruled them up to now? In the first stages of social life they submitted to brute and blind force, then to law, which in reality is the same force, only masked. From this I am led to deduct that by the law of nature, right lies in might. Political freedom is not a fact, but an idea. This idea one must know how to apply when it is necessary, in order to use the same as a bait to attract the power of the populace to one's party, if such party has decided to usurp the power of a rival. The problem is simplified if the said rival becomes infected with ideas of freedom, so-called liberalism, and for the sake of this idea yields some of this power. In this, the triumph of our idea will become apparent. The relinquished reins of government by the law of life are immediately seized by a new hand, because the blind strength of the populace cannot exist for a single day without a leader, and the new government only fills the place of the old, which has been weakened by its liberalism. It could be true in a sense. Does the individual crave government? And I want to get into that in another video. Nowadays, the power of gold has superseded liberal rulers. There was a time when religion ruled. The idea of freedom is not realizable because no one knows how to use it with discretion. It suffices to give the populace self-government for a short period for this populace to become a disorganized rabble. From that very moment, dissensions start, which soon develop into social battles. The states are set in flames, and their total significance vanishes. Whether the state is exhausted by its own internal convulsions, or whether civil wars hand it over to an external foe, it can in any case be considered as definitely and finally destroyed. It will be in our power. The despotism of capital, which is entirely in our hands, will hold out to it a straw to which the state will be unavoidably compelled to cling. If it does not do so, it will inevitably fall into the abyss. Of anybody who might, from motives of liberalism, be inclined to remark that discussions of this kind are immoral, I would ask the question, why is it not immoral for a state which has two enemies, one external and one internal, to use different means of defence against the former to that which it would use against the latter, to make secret plans of defence, to attack him by night or with superior forces? Why should it then be immoral for the state to use these means against that which ruins the foundations and welfare of its life? So you have the notion of an external enemy and an internal enemy. Can a sound and logical mind hope successfully to govern mobs by using arguments and reasoning, when there is a possibility of such arguments and reasonings being contradicted by other arguments, although these may possibly be ridiculous, but are made to appear more attractive to that portion of the populace which cannot think very deeply, guided as it is entirely by petty passions, habits, and conventions, and by sentimental theories? The uninitiated and ignorant populace, together with those who have risen from among them, get entangled in party dissensions which hinder all possibility of agreement, even on a basis of sound arguments. Every decision of the masses is dependent on a chance or prearranged majority which, in its ignorance of political mysteries, passes absurd resolutions, thus sowing the germs of anarchy in the government. So it's basically saying people can't govern themselves, and majorities are pretty useless. Politics have nothing in common with morals. A ruler governed by morals is not a skilled politician, hence he is not firm on his throne. He who wants to rule must have recourse to cunningness and hypocrisy. The great human qualities of sincerity and honesty become vices in politics. So there's a kind of contempt for even politics in any basic sense. They dethrone with more certainty than the bitterest enemy. These qualities have to be the attributes of the Gentile countries, but we are not in the least forced to be guided by them. Our right lies in might. The word right is an abstract idea established by nothing. This word signifies no more than, give me what I want in order to enable me to prove thereby that I am stronger than you are. So again, it's interesting because we're kind of in that Nietzschean worldview, which is only might exists, and power, and the desire for power. And I might go into the pluses and minuses of Nietzsche in another video. Where does right begin? Where does it end? In a state where power is badly organized, where the laws and the personality of the ruler are rendered inefficacious by the continual encroaching of liberalism, I take up a new line of attack, making use of the right of might to destroy the existing rules and regulations, seize the laws, reorganize all the institutions, and thus become the dictator of those who, of their own free will, liberally renounced their power and conferred it on us. Our strength under the present shaky condition of the civil powers will be stronger than any other, because it will be invisible till the moment when it becomes so strong that no cunning designs will undermine it. From the temporary evil to which we are now obliged to have recourse will emerge the benefit of an unshakable rule which will reinstate the course of the mechanism of natural existence, which has been destroyed by liberalism. The end justifies the means. In making our plans, we must pay attention not so much to what is good and moral as to what is necessary and profitable. this reassertion of liberalism is interesting as well. Yes, because liberalism has kind of been redefined over the years. We have in front of us a plan in which a strategic line is shown. From that line we can deviate unless we are going to destroy the work of centuries. To work out a suitable scheme of action, one must bear in mind the meanness, instability and want of ballast on the part of the crowd, its incapability to understand and respect the conditions of its own existence and of its own welfare. One must understand that the might of the crowd is blind and void of reason in discrimination, and that it lends its ear right and left. If the blind lead the blind, they will both fall together into the ditch. Consequently, those members of the crowd who are upstarts from the people, even were they geniuses, cannot come forward as leaders of the mass without ruining the nation. Only a person brought up to autocratic sovereignty can read the words formed by political letters. The people abandoned to itself, i.e. to upstarts from the masses, is ruined by party dissensions which arise from greed of power and honours and which create disturbances and disorder. So the point here is that any attempt from the normal mass of people to gain power is disorderly and disturbing to this plan. Is it possible for the mass to discriminate quietly and without jealousies to administer the affairs of state, which they must not confuse with their personal interests? Can they be a defence against a foreign foe? This is impossible, as a plan broken up into as many parts as there are minds in the mass loses its value and therefore becomes unintelligible and unworkable. Alone, an autocrat can conceive vast plans clearly assigning its proper part to everything in the mechanism of the machine of state. Hence we conclude that it is expedient for the welfare of the country that the government of the same should be in the hands of one responsible person. Without absolute despotism, civilization cannot exist. For civilization is capable of being promoted only under the protection of the ruler, whoever he may be, and not at the hands of the masses. The crowd is a barbarian and acts as such on every occasion. As soon as the mob has secured freedom, it speedily turns it into anarchy, which in itself is the height of barbarism. Just look at these alcoholized animals, stupid by the drink, of which unlimited use is tolerated by freedom. Should we allow ourselves and our fellow creatures to do likewise? The people of the Christians, bewildered by alcohol, their youths turned crazy by classics and early debauchery, to which they have been instigated by our agents, tutors, servants, governesses in rich houses, clerks, and so forth, by our women in places of their amusement. To the latter I add the so-called society women, their voluntary followers in corruption and luxury. Our motto must be all means of force and hypocrisy. So there's a contradiction here. The person loathes the mass of people, because they're befuddled by drink, and I don't know whether he says classics, he means classic literature, or I'm not sure. And yet, at the same time, he's saying we've created that. So you loathe your own creation. That's interesting. You loathe your own manipulation of the people. Only sheer force is victorious in politics, especially if it is concealed in the talent indispensable for statesmen. Violence must be the principle, cunning and hypocrisy must be the rule of those governments which do not wish to lay down their crown at the feet of the agents of some new power. This evil is the only means of attaining the goal of good. Therefore we must not stop short before bribery, deceit and treachery, if these are to serve the achievement of our cause. In politics we must know how to confiscate property without any hesitation, if by so doing we can attain subjection and power. Our state, following the way of peaceful conquest, has the right of substituting for the terrors of war executions, less apparent and more expedient, which are necessary to uphold terror producing blind submission. Just and implacable severity is the chief factor in state power, not only for the sake of advantage, but also for that of duty and victory. We must keep to the program of violence and hypocrisy. Our principles are as powerful as the means by which we put them into execution. That is why, not only by these very means, but by the severity of our doctrines, we shall triumph and shall enslave all governments under our super-government. It suffices that it should be known that we are implacable in preventing recalcitrance. Even of old we were the first to cry out to the people, liberty, equality, and fraternity. That's interesting, of course, because we have the earlier French Revolution as the example there. I mean, it's plain in the document. Words so often repeated since that time by ignorant parrots flocking together from far and wide round these signposts. By repeating them, they deprive the world of its prosperity and the individual of his real personal freedom, which formerly had been so well guarded from being choked by the mob. The would-be wise and intelligent Gentiles did not discern how abstract were the words which they were uttering, and did not notice how little these words agreed with one another and even contradicted each other. They did not see that in nature there is no equality, and that she herself created different and unequal standards of mind, character, and capacity. I would agree with that in the main, that equality is a kind of brainwashing technique, that there is some natural hierarchy in the world. And I guess this person is gloating that they have managed to brainwash the populace into thinking that equality exists either in nature or in humans emulating nature. That's my comment. Anyway, let's go on. It is likewise with the subjection to nature's laws. These wiseacres did not divine that the mob is a blind power, and that the upstarts elected from its midst as rulers are likewise blind in politics, that a man intended to be a ruler, although a fool, can govern, but that a man who has not been so intended, although he might be a genius, would understand nothing of politics. All this was left out of sight by the Gentiles. At the same time, it was on this basis that dynastic rule was founded. The father used to instruct the son in the meaning and in the course of political evolutions in such a manner that no one except the members of the dynasty should have knowledge of it, and that none could disclose the secrets to the governed people. In time, the meaning of true political teachings as transmitted in dynasties from one generation to another was lost, and this loss contributed to the success of our cause. So this person is really referring to the time up until then, let's say the turn of the century, between the 1800s and the 1900s, and the time from the French Revolution up until the present day. The assumption of the protocols is that the assumption that most people have about the protocols is that it was written at the turn of the century, and this is the publication in 1905. I keep going. Our call of liberty, equality, and fraternity brought whole legions to our ranks from all four corners of the world through our unconscious agents, and these legions carried our banners with ecstasy. In the meantime, these words were eating like so many worms into the well-being of the Christians, and were destroying their peace, steadfastness, and unity, thus ruining the foundations of the states. As we shall see later on, it was this action which brought about our triumph. It gave us the possibility, among other things, of playing the ace of trumps, namely the abolition of privileges. In other words, the existence of the Gentile aristocracy, which was the only protection nations and countries had against ourselves. This is interesting. We've got to be careful here about what we're reading. So we're reading an English translation of something published in Russian, which beforehand came out of another language. The assumption is English. The reason I mention that now is this mention of the states and the capital S for states. This is all to do with the translator of the document from Russian to English, but if it does represent whatever was in the original language, there's an inference here that it could be America might be the home base. The United States might be the home base of this conspiracy, although it's already been mentioned that it's French and Freemasonic. But then again, the founders kind of have the French Freemasonic angle in their beginnings as well. So, and I'm not one of those people who has a conclusion about whether the United States was set up Freemasonically, malevolently, or otherwise. I know that there's a great schism in some researchers. Some people believe it was all. There are many approaches to that problem. Some people think it was Freemasonic but beneficent. Some people think it was Freemasonic and malevolent, and others, I guess, the mainstream view would be that it was a natural accretion of getting these values and instilling them into a populace, and that it was benign. I don't have an opinion on that as of yet. I take both of the first two angles seriously and have studied them. I probably lean more to the idea that possibly there were positive Freemasonic influences in the founding of the US, but I take that with a pinch of salt in my own mind, and I'm very curious in more negative readings of the founding of the US. On the ruins of natural and hereditary aristocracy, we build an aristocracy of our own on a plutocratic basis. We establish this new aristocracy on wealth of which we had control and on science promoted by our scholars. Our triumph was rendered easier by the fact that we, through our connections with people who were indispensable to us, always worked upon the most susceptible part of the human mind, namely, by playing on our victims' weakness for profits, on their greed, on their insatiability, and on the material requirements of man. For each one of the said weaknesses, taken by itself, is capable of destroying initiative, thus handing over the willpower of the people to the mercy of those who would deprive them of all their power of initiative. The abstractness of the word freedom made it possible to convince the mob that the government is nothing else than a manager, representing the owner, that is to say, the nation, and can be discarded like a worn-out pair of gloves. The fact that the representatives of the nation can be deposed delivered these representatives into our power and practically put their appointment into our hands. Well, that seems to have proved true in the main. There's a gap here. It is indispensable for our purpose. I'll read that again. It is indispensable for our purpose that wars should not produce any territorial alterations. Thus, without territorial modifications, war would be transferred onto an economical footing. And this is possibly where pound comes in. Then nations will recognize our superiority in the assistance which we shall render, and this state of affairs will put both sides at the mercy of our international millionized agents, who are possessed of absolutely unlimited means. Then our international rights will sweep away the laws of the world and will rule countries in the same manner as individual governments rule their subjects. We will select administrators from among the public who will be possessed of servile tendencies. They will not be experienced in the art of government, and therefore will be easily turned into pawns in our game, in the hands of our learned and wise counsellors, who have been especially trained from early childhood for governing the world. As is already known to you, these men have studied the science of governing from our political plans, from experience of history, and from observation of passing events. The Gentiles do not profit by continuous historical observations, but follow theoretical routine without contemplating what the results of the same may be. Therefore, we need not take the Gentiles into consideration. Let them enjoy themselves until the time comes, or let them live in hopes of new amusements or on the reminiscences of past joys. Let them think that these laws of theory with which we have inspired them are of supreme importance to them. With this object in view, and with the help of our press, we continually increase their blind faith in these laws. The educated classes of the Gentiles will pride themselves in their learning, and without verifying it, they will put into practice the knowledge obtained from science, which was dished up to them by our agents, with the object of educating their minds in the direction which we required. Do not imagine that our assertions are empty words. Note here the success of Darwin, Marx, and Nietzsche, prearranged by us. The demoralizing effect of the tendencies of these sciences on the Gentile mind should certainly be obvious to us. And I want to make a mental note. I'm even going to make a note in my notebook here. So Darwin, Marx, and Nietzsche. Interestingly, Nietzsche is mentioned there. Darwin and Marx are a little bit more well known as to what a communist takeover might be. It seems to me that Nietzsche is focused on here just for the sake of the dynamics of power which he spoke about. But again, I'll try and separate that out for another video. In order to, let me just gone too far up there. In order to refrain from making mistakes in our policy and administrative work, it is essential for us to study and bear in mind the present line of thought of the characters and tendencies of nations. The triumph of our theory is its adaptability to the temperament of the nations with which we come in contact. We cannot be successful if its practical application is not based on the experience of the past in conjunction with observations of the present. The press in the hands of existing governments is a great power by which the control of people's minds is obtained. The press demonstrates the vital claims of the populace, advertises complaints, and sometimes creates discontent among the mob. The realization of free speech is born in the press. Interesting. But governments did not know how to make proper use of this power, and it fell into our hands. Through the press we achieved influence, although we ourselves kept in the background. Thanks to the press we accumulated gold, though it cost us streams of blood. It cost us the sacrifice of many of our people. But every sacrifice on our side is worth thousands of Gentiles before God. I'm just noting these little stars that indicate pauses, and then there are some numbers written in which I haven't read out. This has number 3 in it. See, my knowledge of the protocols was like a few sheets of numbered policies. I'd never read it. I knew what Pound was inferring, and so this is confusing me slightly because it's longer than I thought, but very interesting, and isn't set up as a number of policies. It's more like just a long prose piece in sections. Anyway, let's keep going, and if it's too long to fit into one video, I could break it up, or perhaps you could study it on your own, and maybe I can come up with a summary video or something. 3. Today I can assure you that we are only within a few strides of our goal. There remains only a short distance, and the cycle of the symbolic serpent, that badge of our people, will be complete. Interesting mention there. It reminds me of the Ouroboros serpent. So there's an alchemical inference there, I guess. When this circle is locked, all the states of Europe will be enclosed in it, as it were, by unbreakable chains. So although this has been translated out of Russian, with the Soviet Union as the main concern by the person publishing, the actual protocols refer more to Europe. The existing constructional scales will soon collapse because we are continually throwing them out of balance in order the more quickly to wear them out and destroy their efficiency. The Gentiles thought that the scales had been made sufficiently strong and expected them to balance accurately, but the supporters of the scales, that is to say the heads of states, are hampered by their servants who are of no avail to them. drawn away as they are by this unlimited power of intrigue which is theirs, thanks to the terrors prevailing in the palaces. Okay, so now the emphasis is shifting. So when I assume that it's the states of the United States of America, no, we've been given a European context now. How are we to deal with that? Remember that just previous to this, we've had the foundation of Italy as a nation, which is interesting. So states has a ambivalent meaning at this point. Could just refer to European countries, or could refer to states, regions of European countries. In any case, it's definitely referring to monarchy as a negative influence. As the sovereign has no means of access to the hearts of his people, he cannot defend himself against the power-loving intriguers. As the watchful power has been separated by us from the blind power of the populace, both have lost their significance, because once parted, they are as helpless as a blind man without a stick. In order to induce lovers of power to make a bad use of their rights, we set all powers one against the other by encouraging their liberal tendencies towards independence. We encouraged every undertaking in this direction. We placed formidable weapons in the hands of all parties and made power the goal of every ambition. Out of governments we made arenas on which party wars are fought out. Soon open disorder and bankruptcy will appear everywhere. 2020. It's interesting. Insuppressible babblers transformed parliamentary and administrative meetings into debating meetings. Audacious journalists and impudent pamphleteers are continually attacking the administrative powers. Abuse of power will definitely prepare the crash of all institutions, and everything will fall prostrate under the blows of the raging populace. The people are enslaved in the sweat of their brows, in poverty, after a manner more formidable than the laws of serfdom. From the latter they could free themselves by some means or another, whereas nothing will liberate them from the tyranny of absolute want. We took care to insert rights in constitutions which for the masses are purely fictitious. All the so-called rights of the people can only exist in ideas which are not applicable in practice. How does it avail a workman of the proletariat who is bent double by hard work and oppressed by his fate, if a chatterer gets the right to speak or a journalist the right to publish any kind of rubbish? What good is a constitution to the proletariat if they get no other advantage from it except the crumbs which we throw them from our table in return for their votes to elect our agents? Republican rights are an irony for the pauper, for the necessity of every day's labour keeps him from gaining any advantage by such rights, and it only takes away the guarantee of continuous, fixed wages, making him dependent on strikes, employers, and comrades. Under our auspices, the populace exterminated the aristocracy, which had supported and guarded the people for its own benefit, which benefit is inseparable from the welfare of the populace. So that's a really interesting statement, because, of course, during my lifetime, you had this. And this is why Trump is so loathed in a way, especially in Britain. Not loathed en masse. I know some people are interested in him, but my point is that social change and good government, in most modern liberals' minds, comes from the unprivileged person, the person who is not an aristocrat. And yet, here in this document, they're saying that, the aristocracy had a certain measure of power and it was useful for the freedom of people, and we don't like that. Nowadays, having destroyed the privileges of the aristocracy, the people fall under the yoke of cunning profiteers and upstarts. We intend to appear as though we were the liberators of the labouring man, come to free him from this oppression, when we shall suggest to him to join the ranks of our armies of socialists, anarchists, and communists. The latter we always patronise, pretending to help them out of fraternal principle, and the general interest of humanity evoked by our socialistic masonry. The aristocracy, who by right shared the labour of the working classes, were interested in the same being well fed, healthy and strong. We are interested in the opposite, i.e. in the degeneration of the Gentiles. Our strength lies in keeping the working man in perpetual want and impotence, because by so doing we retain him subject to our will and in his own surroundings. He will never find either power or energy to stand up against us. Hunger will confer upon capital more powerful rights over the labourer than ever the lawful power of the sovereign could confer upon the aristocracy. We govern the masses by making use of feelings of jealousy and hatred kindled by oppression and need, and by means of these feelings we brush aside those who impede us in our cause. That's a really interesting statement as well, because I've talked a little bit about it's a spiritual takeover. Once you feel that you're in this ever expanding competition with everyone around you, you don't hold sacred family, friends, community, and you're just in this perpetual sense of rush and need of economic want and resentment towards those who are different to you, etc. That's a spiritual problem, which whether this person has indeed imposed it through the avenues that he's already mentioned. Regardless, it's a spiritual issue as well. When the time comes for our worldly ruler to be crowned, we will see to it that by the same means, that is to say, by making use of the mob, we will destroy everything that may prove to be an obstacle in our way. The Gentiles are no longer capable of thinking without our aid in matters of science. That is why they do not realize the vital necessity of certain things, which we will make a point of keeping against the moment when our hour arrives, namely that in schools the only true and most important of all sciences must be taught, that is, the science of the life of man and social conditions, both of which require a division of labour and therefore the classification of people in castes and classes. Here you go, the British class system for you. It is imperative that everyone should know that true equality cannot exist owing to the different nature of various kinds of work, and those who act in a manner detrimental to a whole caste have a different responsibility before the law to those who commit a crime only affecting their personal honour. The true science of social conditions, to the secrets of which we do not admit the Gentiles, would convince the world that occupations and labour should be kept in specified castes so as not to cause human suffering arising from an education which does not correspond with the work which individuals are called upon to do. Again, that's really interesting, because we are very categoried up in modern Western life, and the experts are those that study a certain discipline, and we are supposed to bow down to those people. The self-made man, the self-taught man or woman, as I mentioned in other videos, is exempt from all of this stuff because it allows for holism and synchronism, so that you can study multiple disciplines and become an expert on your own, or at least show some education of your own making. That is not tolerated under this template, because everyone is in specific channels of study, and anyone who is not in a different channel of study cannot deem themselves an expert on it. You get this all the time. If I raise questions about who Hitler was, what he did, or other figures of history, somebody will say, I've had this before in the past, somebody will say, I studied history, that is wrong. And that's all they'll say about it. There's no discussion there. You're wrong. So there's no debate, there's no holism, there's no let's compare notes kind of idea between people. We're simply in these channels, and I know about this stuff because I studied it, and you don't, and that's the end of it. So this is kind of successful brainwashing in a way, that's happened over the 20th century, regardless of whether this document is indeed genuine. This hatred will become still more acute where economical crises are concerned, for then it will stop the markets and production. We will create a universal economical crisis by all possible underhand means and with the help of gold, which is all in our hands. Simultaneously, we will throw onto the streets huge crowds of workmen throughout Europe. These masses will then gladly throw themselves upon and shed the blood of those of whom in their ignorance they have been jealous from childhood, and whose belongings they will then be able to plunder. So the idea is anybody who exempts themselves or is kicked out of this world system is going to be so writhing with prejudice against his fellow man that there will be no communal cohesion, and that we would just simply rob each other. I'm more positive in that way. I don't see that happening, particularly with the internet now, but I don't want to get too caught up in commentary. They will not harm us because the moment of the attack will be known to us, and we will take measures to protect our interests. We persuaded the Gentiles that liberalism would bring them to a kingdom of reason. So there's this contradictory element of liberalism. There's a liberalism that's sanctioned by these supposed rulers, and then there's a liberalism that's aberrant to their system, which they don't like. So again, different approaches to liberalism. It's interesting. We persuaded the Gentiles that liberalism would bring them to a kingdom of reason. Our despotism will be of this nature, for it will be in a position to put down all rebellions, and by just severity to exterminate every liberal idea from all institutions. And again, I'm forced to comment here. It does have this sense of two conceptions of what liberalism is, and they are going to invent a liberalism on top of the classical liberalism, and they're going to use that to divide and conquer. Seems to me, anyway. Which gives you hope for classical liberals, possibly. I'm not very partisan myself. I don't know. I've said in other videos I'm nationalistic, but anyway, let's get on. When the populace noticed that it was being given all sorts of rights in the name of liberty, it imagined itself to be the master and tried to assume power. Of course, like every blind man, the mass came up against innumerable obstacles. Then, as it did not wish to return to the former regime, it lay its power at our feet. Remember the French Revolution, which we call the Great. The secrets of its preparatory organization are well known to us, being the work of our hands. There you go, it's explicit now. From that time onwards, we have led nations from one disappointment to another, so that they should even renounce us in favor of the king despot of the blood of Zion, whom we are preparing for the world. Again, there's lots of comments you could make there. But again, it's not. There's no sense reading this document that it's a document of Jews against the world. It's a very specific number of people, and this is the document of Zionism and not an overall Jewish conspiracy. I don't think. And there we have it. Also with the Freemasons, that this could be an admission that Freemasonry was benign before this particular power took over. And again, he's saying that they claim the French Revolution as their own masterwork. So, can we deduce from that earlier forms of Freemasonry were benign? That's a question for you to ask yourself. At present, we, as an international force, are invulnerable because, whilst we are attacked by one Gentile government, we are upheld by others. In their intense meanness, the Christian peoples help our independence. When kneeling, they crouch before power. When they are pitiless towards the weak, merciless in dealing with faults, and lenient to crimes. When they refuse to recognize the contradictions of freedom. When they are patient to the degree of martyrdom in bearing with the violence of an audacious despotism. There you go. This is the weakness of late 20th century life, really. The inability to take personal and communal responsibility of what's happening to yourself and your country. At the hands of their present dictators, premiers and ministers, they endure abuses, for the smallest of which they would have murdered 20 kings. How is this state of affairs to be explained? Why are the masses so illogical in their conception of events? The reason is that despots persuade the people through their agents that although they may misuse their power and do injury to the state, this injury is done with a high purpose, i.e., in order to attain prosperity for the populace, for the sake of international fraternity, unity, and equality. Okay, there you go again. I'm just checking you, essentially. Have a bit of a break, hold on. Certainly, they do not tell them that such unification can only be obtained under our rule, so we see the populace condemning the innocent and acquitting the guilty, convinced that it can always do what it pleases. Owing to this state of mind, the mob destroys all solidity and creates disorder at every turn and corner. The word liberty brings society into conflict with all the powers, even with that of nature and of God. That is why, when we come into power, we must strike the word liberty out of the human dictionary, as being the symbol of bestial power, which turns the populace into bloodthirsty animals. But we must bear in mind that these animals fall asleep as soon as they are satiated with blood, and at that moment it is easy to enchant and enslave them. If they are not given blood, they will not sleep, but will fight with one another. Interesting. So there's a kind of sacrificial element going on there. Let's keep going. I'm now on number 4. Every republic passes through various stages. The first stage is the first days raging of the blind, sweeping and destroying right and left. The second, the reign of the demagogue, bringing forth anarchy and entailing despotism. This despotism is not officially legal and therefore irresponsible. It is concealed and invisible, but all the same lets itself be felt. It is generally controlled by some secret organization which acts behind the back of some agent, and will therefore be the more unscrupulous and daring. This secret power will not mind changing its agents who mask it. The changes will even help the organization, which will thus be able to rid itself of old servants, to whom it would have been necessary to pay larger bonuses for long service. Who or what can dethrone an invisible power? Now this is just what our government is. The Masonic Lodge throughout the world unconsciously acts as a mask for our purpose. But the use that we are going to make of this power in our plan of action, and even our headquarters, remain perpetually unknown to the world at large. Liberty could be harmless and exist in governments and countries without being detrimental to the welfare of the people, if it were based on religion and fear of God, on human fraternity, free from ideas of equality which are in direct contradiction to the laws of creation and which have ordained submission. This is an incredibly revealing paragraph. So not only are they going to co-opt liberalism, they're going to co-opt the concept of liberty. So, for example, the use of the word liberty in, say, P.B. Shelley's writing, is that a more constructive concept for you to carry with you in your political thought or not? It's worth noting that the Romantics, some of them were on board the French Revolution early, and then they quickly shift, most of them, I think all of them really. Wordsworth, Coleridge particularly. Wordsworth was very pro, and then was very against and very conservative in his later life. Shelley, in relation to this, is interesting. He was a disciple of Godwin, who I would guess would be more pro-French Revolution early on, but I haven't read later Godwin to know if he was of this design, of person or not. Godwin was an anarchist, so take that as you will, and Shelley was to a degree, but Shelley's a more tricky person to pinned down, probably being a poet, they usually are. Governed by such a faith as this, the people would be ruled under the guardianship of their parishes and would exist quietly and humbly under the guidance of the spiritual pastor and submit to God's disposition on earth. That is why we must extract the very conception of God from the minds of the Christians and replace it by arithmetical calculations and material needs. In order to divert the minds of the Christians from our policy, it is essential that we should keep them occupied with trade and commerce. Look at your modern churches, particularly the American ones, in my knowledge anyway. Thus all nations will be striving for their own profits, and in this universal struggle will not notice their common enemy. But so that liberty should entirely dislocate and ruin the social life of the Gentiles, we must put commerce on a speculative basis. The result of this will be that the riches of the land extracted by production will not remain in the hands of the Gentiles, but will pass through speculation into our coffers. The struggle for superiority and continuous speculations in the business world will create a demoralized, selfish and heartless society. I would say that was pretty much what I grew up with, to be honest. I felt there wasn't much cultural cohesion even in the late 20th century, and that it was a dog-eat-dog situation, whether you were a teenager or you were an adult. This society will become completely indifferent and even disgusted by religion and politics. That's really interesting because, of course, what I did find when I went to Korea was that the respect for the true politician still lived in that environment. This is one of the more positive things about Korea. Whereas in the Western world and in the Britain of the late 20th century, people just loathe politicians, and they loathe them even more now. And so what they want to do is get the loathing so high that we cannot imagine a beneficial politician. And again, it's just a really interesting comment, because we loathe religion and we loathe politics, or politicians. We like the grab what you can kind of political gossip column, but we don't have a respect for the beneficial politician. Lust of gold will be their only guide, and this society will strive after this gold, making a veritable cult of the materialistic pleasures with which it can keep them supplied. Then the lower classes will join us against our competitors, the privileged Gentiles, with no pretense to a noble motive, or even for the sake of riches, but out of pure hatred towards the upper classes. Okay, I'm going to leave it there for now, because this is obviously a much longer document than I imagined, and I have a couple of errands to run, so I'm just interested in getting to grips with the protocols, and that's 4 sections as far as I can tell of the document. It's fascinating reading, and I'd want you to consider it in relation to say the Pound video I made. Again, it's not about a Jewish conspiracy, it's about a group that is, in fact, its reference to Gentiles is even more divisive, isn't it really? Because then the presumption of somebody reading that would be, let's get on and get at the Jews about this. So that's another divisive technique that they've seemed to have mastered, is this use of Gentiles, because then people will deal with that information out of their own category, and they will say, that's not a good thing, I don't like the Jews anymore, or something like that. And that's exactly what they want. So I wouldn't encourage anybody to kind of take that generalistic view just from what I've read here. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that, and I'll do a follow-up video. I may read this on in my own time and then pick out the pieces that I think are useful. I'm not sure how I'm going to deal with it yet, but I hope that you attempted to read along with me, or at least found what I read already interesting in some ways, particularly in relation to all this you know, confection of new theories of conspiracy from the last little while on the internet. So I hope it proved useful. Okay, I'll come back with some kind of follow-up soon. Thanks very much. Bye now.